one of the things that I always talk about in coaching is that it's all about the start line. It does you no good to be thinking about what might happen at the finish line. Again, that's just energy that is just taking away from what you could use in your moment that you have an opportunity in which to be good.
I hope that that's the case with not just athletes, but people that really are trying to be the best at whatever they're doing, whether it's in business or anything.
That's why I'm always talking about start lines over finish lines. That start lines are these magical moments and spaces of being present and being aware and being humble and being grounded and grateful. Honestly, I remember so much less about what happened after we crossed the finish line. But oh my gosh, from the time we woke up at 4:45 in the morning on the day of the Olympic Games until we crossed the start line, not the finish line, until we crossed the start line, I can tell you what we did every second of the day, what that routine looked like from 4:45 a.m. until we crossed the start line at 10:17 a.m.
Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Mark Moyer, author of Win Again, speaker, career coach, and business advisor. And I help athletes, executives, and entrepreneurs reach their fullest potential. What you're going to be hearing in every single episode are conversations with athletes and other sports-related influencers. And we'll be offering you the insight that you need to succeed in life, including advice that will let you jump past your competition, whether it be for a great new job or taking your business to a much, much higher level. Make sure to connect with me on social media at Mark Moyer Coach and go to my website, markmoyer.com, to get access to the tips and strategies that my coaching clients get directly. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com and I'll get you going right away. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be an awesome episode. Now, are you ready to make your mark? Let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer and I'm broadcasting to you live from New York City. And I'm thrilled to have you on board wherever you're listening. If it's here in New York, somewhere else in the United States, or anywhere else on the planet, thanks for being here. And I'm super excited because I just spoke with Joe Jacobi. And Joe Jacobi is one of these guys who he leveraged the fact that he won a gold medal in the Olympics, which is, as everyone knows, you're number one on the planet and you get a shot every 4 years. Great guy. But he's also doing some amazing coaching right now, especially from performance-based angle. And he's helping companies and individuals really reach super high levels. And we had such a great conversation. This guy is a nice guy, a funny guy, and he's hailing from Spain right now. That's where he lives, right at the site where he won his gold medal. Anyway, before you listen to this episode, though, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you're listening to this. Jump on board. Send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com. I'd love to hear from you and hear your feedback about these podcasts. And go to my website when you have a chance, and you'll have access to all this amazing content that will help you take your business to a higher level or your career to that next step you really want to be in. Tons of great content, access to the podcast, markmoyer.com. Check it out. In the meantime, listen to the rest of this episode. You're going to love this. Joe's a great guy. Happy listening. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. I'm super thrilled to have Joe Jacobi on board. Joe is hailing from some far-off country, and I'm going to let you tell us where you are, Joe.
Hey, Mark. I am talking today from La Seu d'Urgell, Catalonia, which is the Spanish state in which I live. And La Seu d'Urgell is a town of 12,000 people, 2 hours north of Barcelona, and happens to be the town where my canoe partner and I won America's first ever Olympic gold medal in the sport of whitewater canoeing.
So no wonder why you hang out there. You're reliving the old days. No, I'm kidding. Not completely.
Very little reliving the old days. Boy, have I found just a great way to learn so many new things about life and myself by living here. Incidentally, my wife and I have a 17-year-old daughter who is named after the town in which we live. the name of the town is Laseo d'Urgell, and our daughter, the locals call it Laseo, and our daughter's name is Seo Jane Jacobi. So
wow, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can't. I shouldn't name my son Manhattan. That'd be kind of weird, probably. But I don't know.
I'm also glad we didn't win the Olympics in Dusseldorf.
I'm sure your daughter is too.
Yeah,
that's great.
I think the name worked out well for the daughter.
That's amazing. Congrats on that. Well, look, so I want to jump right in. What we're going to be talking about today. Look, you bring a lot to the table, Joe, with your coaching and what you do for a variety of people and companies and so forth. It's all about performance coaching and advising people on how to become better themselves and better at what they do, among other things. But I like to talk a little bit about the roots and where a lot of this started. And, I'm very curious to know, what was it that got you involved in canoeing in the first place? What put you in that boat, in that canoe that said, you know what, this is kind of cool? What got you started?
Well, it's a great question, and there's a little bit of a Malcolm Gladwell outlier story in that. I mean, the real answer is I took advantage of a very fortuitous circumstance in my life. A lot of people would not normally think that growing up in Washington, D.C. is a fortuitous circumstance, but believe it or not, in the world of canoeing, it is a huge fortuitous circumstance. And Mark, the reason for that is that most of America's great whitewater rapids and rivers are in rural destinations like West Virginia, Colorado, Idaho. You could name a lot of places, but typically you don't find great whitewater in the middle of a big city. And Washington, D.C. is a huge exception to that. We have the Potomac River, and what that did when I was young, there was a whole culture of world champions and the legendary coach of the sport. When I got recruited into canoeing at 12 years old, and believe me, there was nothing special about me as an athlete at 12 years old. It was when I went to my first canoeing workout, everyone there was a world champion or a world medalist. It was truly like getting to go play basketball with Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and being coached by Phil Jackson. It was just a very fortuitous circumstance to be there. Those were my role models growing up in canoeing, and being good at it, I just wanted to do it a little bit more.
Well, but when you say recruited into canoeing, I mean, I think some people get recruited into basketball, baseball, and don't take this the wrong way, but it seems like a somewhat random thing to be recruited into. Like what someone woke up one morning and said, we've got to talk to Joe. He'd be a great canoeist. Let's bring him in.
So, and let me backtrack from the recruiting part, because I started canoeing at a summer camp a day camp in the Washington, D.C. area. And that camp actually had a lot of good connections and relationships to the racing world of canoeing as well. But really what happens, I think, when you are 10 years old, which is what I was when I got the bug, look, when you're 10 and you're good at something, or maybe like the best in your little group at summer camp, I was never the best at anything. In fact, I love team sports as a fan, but I wasn't very good as an athlete. And so then I was the first person in my group to learn how to do the Eskimo roll, which is when you turn upside down in a kayak and then you ride it back up. Yep. And I had never been the first at anything, Mark. And so at 10 years old, you're the first to do something, you're pretty good at it, and you say, I might like to stick with this a little bit longer. And by sticking with that a little bit longer, that's when it sort of caught the attention of this wonderful culture of champions who were training at a higher level. And, and their question to the summer camp was, who do you guys have that might be interested in doing the sport? And that's how I kind of got my first invitation to come to a U.S. team workout when I was 12 years old.
Wow. And I'm assuming that was a little exciting.
That was amazing. I mean, back in those days, this was the early 1980s. I mean, there was no internet. The big deal is that once a year, the sport of canoeing put out a paper program with all the pictures of whitewater racing at all levels, whether that was elite level racing or families who just like to go out and enjoy the sport on a recreational level. And that's how we sort of knew who all the champions were, by who was on the cover of that magazine every year. Oh, cool. And here I was in a workout session at 12 years old with like the last 5 people who had been on the cover of that magazine. Wow. So that was very exciting. And we had the legendary coach of the sport giving us advice and telling us how we could improve and get better. And they invited us to come back. And I was the one that just kind of kept showing up and kept coming back. And I didn't know any better, except it wasn't, again, that I was so good at it. I just liked the people that I was doing it with.
Well, look, and you know, that's a huge part of what keeps you interested in the sport, right? It's the team, it's the people that you're surrounded by. If you love playing a sport but you can't stand the other players on the team, you're likely going to quit the team or you're going to do something else. So that's absolutely essential. And you know, what's interesting is that translates, as you know, into the corporate world, into working world, where you're going to excel if you're surrounded by people that you like and people you respect. So that's a great point. So I guess I'm curious then, you know, you're 12, you're 13, you're starting to grow as you know, get bigger and stronger, and you're growing as a teenager. And I know you started entering lots of competitions, including some. When did you start competing internationally? When was the first time you went to a different country and were like, oh my God, I need a passport. This is cool.
Yeah, I was. It was my junior year of high school. Actually, I qualified for the U.S. Junior Whitewater team when I was 16 years old. That was 1986 for the International Canoe Federation, which is the international federation that sanctions all the international competitions. 1986 was the first year they ever hosted a Junior World Championship. So I was racing in the first one, and you know, to meet all the athletes that I met, many of whom I'm still friends with today. Many of whom that I competed with at the 1992 Olympic Games, just, you know, 6 years later. But that's what got me started. Look, canoeing, whitewater canoeing, if we just say the words whitewater canoeing or whitewater kayaking, that's going to kind of conjure up an image of adventure and risk and gravity sports. Like, we can imagine how a lot of our listeners and viewers are going to think about those words, and they're correct. As good as those feelings were, I'm a people person, and I just really connected well with the people and the relationships that who it was that the river brought together. And I admired them. I admired the diversity. I admired that canoeing was the kind of sport where, say, unlike basketball or football, there wasn't like a prototype body build or mindset. That you could be creative and artistic and be successful. You could be big and strong and be successful. You could be really small and really light and you could be successful. It was never about your own power and strength. It was about aligning with the power and strength of something much bigger and much stronger than you. And here we were, just a kind of a collection of all of us doing that together. And at the end of the day, we didn't race against each other. We competed against the river. We competed against a wild, fierce force that just doesn't know how to stop. And you know, that was the bond of the relationships, was the people coming together around the medium of navigating whitewater rapids.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you bring that up about, you know, I think some people feel like every athlete, every Olympian, every professional athlete has to be these big, bulky, super strong, and maybe less so, you know, for some sports like maybe tennis or something, I don't know. But in your case, it's not that. As you said, it's learning how to navigate the waters, you know, Mother Nature and what they're throwing at you, what she's throwing at you, and how to get through that with the. I mean, it's almost, you know, almost all of this. I mean, it's yes, certainly your skill set, right? And because, you know, I had a previous podcast guest of mine. His name is Ruben Gonzalez, and he's clever because he desperately wanted to be in the Olympics, you know, as a Winter Olympian, and he didn't have any of the body shape, any of that stuff. So he figured out quickly that the sport he could excel in is the luge. And basically the reason he did the luge was he said, look, very few people on the planet actually want to sit on a sled and haul ass down the ice and practically get killed.
Actually, it sounds pretty good to me, but yeah.
Well, I think the part where, I mean, most of it, I think that,
I get it. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I know. And so I get the feeling in your case too, where not that, I don't know if it's as dangerous. I'm sure it's dangerous, but maybe not as crazy as the other one. But I respect that, because what you've done is you've figured out, well, look, here's a sport that I can really crush in. I can be one of the world's best. And I think it's I was going to say I have a couple of regrets. Not really. I try not to have regrets. But one of them is, when I was a kid, I always thought that my mom happened to be born and raised in Egypt, of all places. And so I was thinking when I was a teenager, I could be a skier, a downhill skier on the Egyptian ski team, because they didn't have one. And I'm thinking, I'm in, man. I can be in the Winter Olympics, march in the opening ceremonies, and be the Egyptians Winter Olympics team. But I never did it. But that would have been pretty cool. Anyway,
you still got time.
I know. You know what? You're probably right. I don't think they've got too many other skiers, do they? Oh, man. Anyway, so this is all cool. So you started entering these international competitions. At what point did you realize, you know what? I might have a shot at really being one of the top guys here. I mean, you mentioned that, you're 12, 13, 14, you're starting to attend these camps and the competitions, but there had to be a point where you were like, you know what? I got my act together here.
It's an interesting question. I got to say, I'm really not the person that was always motivated by what place or what color medal. I just know that I really love the sport, and I love to learn, and I love to improve, and I just wanted to kind of keep getting better. I knew that I was training I was a part of one of the very best training groups, cultures in the history of our sport. So I knew I had something going for me. And I remember that my second international year of competing, it was my senior year of high school. I was 17 years old, and I made the senior U.S. team. So now I was on the big boy circuit and the big girl circuit. And I went to my first world championships in the doubles canoe with my canoe partner, Scott Strasbaugh. And the U.S. team did very, very well in this race. My training partners were first, second, and third in the world championships. And wow. I got to be on the team with them. I got to see them on the awards stand, 3 Americans lined up next to each other, 3 American flags going up next to each other while the American national anthem was played in France. It was cool. And I was thinking it might be nice to stick around for this and do this a little bit longer. And so my canoe, at the time, the World Championships only happened once every 2 years, but the next one was going to be 2 years later in 1989 in Western Maryland, the first time ever the United States hosted a World Championships. And I was thinking it could be cool to compete in the World Championships in our home state. I was born grew up in Maryland. And so in the next year, 1988, there wasn't a World Championships, but there was a World Cup circuit. The first year of the World Cup. And my canoe partner and I, by our second year paddling together, we won 2 bronze medals out of the 7 World Cup races. And that, I guess, would be the point where we said, on any given day, we can be on the podium. And at that point, I was 18 years old. And, wow. And then the Olympic, the rumor of whitewater coming back onto the Olympic program, because at the time I started at this point, Mark, the World Championships was the highest level you could go. We were not on the Olympic program until late 1989. And at that point, now we were consistently top 5 in the world in most races we were in, and the sport was going to the Olympic Games. We're like, okay, let's carry on for a few more years and see what we can do with this.
Well, that's amazing. So skipping forward a little bit, it's 1992, you've qualified for the Olympics, and then you show up. So this is, did you have the opportunity did you do the opening ceremonies, the closing? What part of it were you there for?
Well, let me digress a little bit on this question because my real Olympic experience started about 1 year before the Olympic Games. I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that we live in the town of Lascaux d'Urgell, which is where the 92 Olympics were hosted.
Right.
In the sport of whitewater canoeing, it's not the kind of event where you just show up at the Olympic Games and race. Every whitewater rapid, if you think about how whitewater rapids are constructed and how they're formed, it takes a certain slope of the riverbed. It takes a certain amount of water. The rocks are put in different places. I say all this to say that there is no two whitewater channels or rapids that are the same anywhere in the world. It's like a human fingerprint. Everyone is going to be a little bit different. And so if you want to be good, you need to go to the place where the Olympics are going to be held and practice there a lot. And so a year before the Olympics, we had a test event here in Lascaux d'Urgell. And I had a bit of an epiphany 1 year before the Olympics. And I remember arriving in this wonderful town. I was just 21 years old. And I remember thinking, I don't want to wake up in the Olympic Village 1 year from now as an American visiting an Olympic Village. I want to wake up in Lascaux d'Urgell on the day of the Olympic Games like I belong here. And something just changed in that moment where I walked out of the door of my hotel room at that point, and the value of building a relationship with the people I was interacting with in Lascaux, whether that was the restaurants or banks or grocery stores, not just on the water, but off the water. This was my community and these were my people. And I wanted to feel like that sense of belonging. I didn't want to feel like I was living out of a suitcase. And so I think this lesson is very applicable to people who travel in business, people who have to perform their best in different places. You don't always get the benefit of waking up in your own bed. I mean, sometimes you're going to be in a hotel room or you're going to be on an airplane, a long night's travel, and you have to adjust, you have to adapt, you have to be able to change. And whatever that is where you do your most important work, you don't want to be a guest in that scenario. You want that's your home field, that's your home turf. But you have to be very thoughtful in the way you think that out. We ended up spending 100 days in Lascaux d'Urgell the year before the Olympic Games. So almost a third of the year we were here practicing, trying to learn the river, but also understand this culture that was going to be a part of our surroundings on race day.
Well, that's incredible. So you spent all this time preparing. You're getting to know not just, as you said, the people, but the river and everything surrounding it. So that's, that you really immersed yourself, and that's fantastic, right? That's the way to do it, if you can. Now, so tell me then the sort of the build up to the Olympics, but then the Olympics actually started.
Yes.
Did it feel like it was, I don't want to say this the wrong way, was it a less special event because you'd been there so long and so forth, or was it still like, oh my God, there are the 5 rings and, holy crap kind of thing?
Yeah, it was special. Look, you have to remember, growing up as an American in the sport of whitewater canoeing, there were no man-made artificial courses in the United States. There were a lot of our sport, except for the Washington, D.C. area, was practiced and competed upon in very rural areas. Mm-hmm. We didn't have boathouses and locker rooms. Our cars were our locker rooms. We raced out of, we would drive into a remote area. We would put up a race course on a river, and we would race out of our cars. So here, and we were never a part of any multi-sport events. So here we were, whitewater canoeing on the Olympic program with the dream team, with gymnastics, with track and field, with all these amazing sports. So, oh yes, the feeling of being a part of the Olympic program. But what was interesting, it wasn't the American part that was really kind of tugging at me. It was the whitewater canoeing part. I had been a part of this international circuit of whitewater canoe racing for 6 years by the time of the 92 Olympic Games. And all of us had been just traveling the globe, going to World Cups, going to World Championships, going to all kinds of international races and training camp. And here we were walking into the opening ceremonies, which many of us did, almost all of us did, not just the American canoe team, but all the whitewater athletes. And it really felt like we weren't just marching in as a part of the United States, but we were just marching in as whitewater canoeing athletes into this amazing Olympic stadium, and with that pageantry and the tradition, and it was everything that people talk about. It was just a phenomenal experience, just to be a part of something that celebrates values that are so good, and so hopefully that are very pure in sport.
Yeah, that's the general idea, right? So skipping forward a little bit more. So you're finally in this race. You're going down the river.
Yes.
And you have this feeling, you and your partner, like, you know what? I mean, was there a point where you kind of were thinking at all, oh my God, we're doing really great? Or were you just so focused on just hitting the next this, that you didn't even think about what was going on until you got to the bottom and looked up and saw the time or the score and said, whoa, you know? Well,
it's a great question. So there are sort of two answers to your question. So in our sport at the Olympic Games, or the format then was you had 2 race runs down the course. This is about a 2-minute race run in length, and you had 2 runs down the course. They were a couple hours apart, and they take the better of your 2 runs.
Okay.
So we were never thinking about a medal or winning the Olympics. We were just thinking about doing the best that we could do. But after the first run down the course, we were in first place, and not by a little bit. We had a 6-second lead on the next closest boat, which is a huge margin in a 2-minute race. And so we found ourselves in a new position, and our competitors that were more favored to win than we were found themselves in a new position as well. And I got to tell you, after the first run, I mean, then things changed a little bit for us. We did have that moment that, wow, we could really do something here. But here's, I think, the best story that I can tell you and your audience about that moment. We had a coach who saw how we were reacting to having done well. And it's never a good thing to focus on the results in the middle of a race.
Right.
Once you do, you're no longer putting your best energy, your best attention, your best skills, your best present moment, your best presence and awareness into what you can do right now. You're thinking ahead, which is just the worst mistake you can make. And we had a coach came into the athlete tent, slammed his clipboard on the table, and he said, I don't know what you guys think just happened out there, but I saw 5 mistakes. And the way I see things is that if you don't correct all 5 of them, you're not leaving here with a medal. And it was like, at first you're like, why are you ruining the party? You're like, this is great. But I sort of say that a little bit tongue in cheek. But the point was, he got us back into that that athlete mode, doing the best we can do mode. And it was just so it was restart again and just go back to the process of doing what we do best. And we went out and improved our second run. There are 4 categories of racing in whitewater canoe slalom. We were the only boat in the race that was leading after the first run who improved their second run. And that's what it took to win the Olympic Games. Had we not improved, we would have fallen to third place like all the other boats did. So we were the only boat that won both runs of the Olympic Games. And it was never a function of we thought we could do this. Mm-hmm. It was just a function of just getting our heads on straight and going back to doing the very best that we could do. And that's it.
So in that competition, that race, is it so that do you go in the reverse order of your standing, or?
Also a really good question. That does happen now, but back then it didn't. And we were seated there were 17 boats in the race, and I think we were the 7th or 8th boat off the start line. And so after we crossed the finish line, it's like, if you see the video, like, we throw our hands up into the air. And when I show that race run, when I'm speaking to audiences, people will say, "Oh, that's the moment you know that you won the Olympics." And I just shake my head and said, "No, that's the moment that we knew we crossed the finish line at the Olympic Games, and we knew we could not have done any better than that."
Right.
And because there were still 10 more boats to come down after us, any of which could have knocked us off the podium, not just out of the gold medal spot, but off the podium altogether.
Right.
And we just done the very best we could. But yeah, we were on the shore at that point when we actually won the Olympics, when the last boat went through and they weren't going to surpass our time. Like, we were not in the boat at that point. So yeah, that was an interesting part of the
here's something I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit, Joe, here. But this is something that sometimes drives me a little bit nuts when you for example, the other day they announced the Heisman Trophy winner, and what they do is they put all 3 guys in a row sitting there waiting for the name to be announced, and then the winner gets announced. The other 2 clap or they smile graciously, and I don't know. Me, I'd be like, gosh, shit, And so, I'm wondering, when you were watching the other 10 boats coming down, see me, I'd be like, okay, sink, hit a rock, do something bad, whatever it is, instead of like, I know you're going to say, oh no, I wanted my fellow racers to do the best they could in the Olympic spirit and all that. But I'd be like, okay, best they could in the Olympic spirit, but still 100th of a second slower than me. I'd be.
I don't, it's so interesting. I don't know that I was processing it quite like that. I mean, I completely understand, what you're saying. And look, I think it was really once the mistake was made, or once they crossed the finish line, or it became, at that point we knew enough about the course. We could get a sense about how a boat was paddling, like whether they were a threat to beat our time.
Right.
It just never really felt like there were many boats that were in the position to do that. There was certainly one that actually did go faster than us, but in our sport, you have to navigate through poles that are hung from wires above the race. And if you touch those poles, you get penalty seconds added to your time. Right. And so that was the problem with the boat that was faster than us. They were touching the poles. So with the 5-second penalty, they were still about a second and a half, 2 seconds back behind us. So we knew it would be hard for them once they touched that pole. And so that's kind of that moment where, at that point.
How exciting. And so, you're finally on the podium and you've got this big chunk of gold around your neck. And it's, when you speak to athletes that have finally attained that goal, it's just, it's almost like, for a brief moment anyway, just all the weight off your shoulders a little bit, right? I mean, all those years of training and hours and hours and hours, right?
It is that feeling, where you feel lighter, you feel happy. I think you feel grateful. But let me say this, because I've been in the point where I've stood on an Olympic podium. I've also been the person on TV working for NBC as a commentator that's trying to get people really amped up about who's going to win.
Right.
But that's the thing. The athletes don't really think about that. And then the race ends and you're like, oh, well, we are the winner. And it's that time just goes so fast. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like this magical moment with all this time to think about it or process what happens. It's like you weren't really preparing to be the winner. You were just preparing to do the very best that you could do.
Right.
But when I'm the commentator on TV, or I'm doing the announcing at the race, I'll be doing the English announcing at the World Championships here in Laseo in September. Look, our job is to create that tension. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, that's what makes sports so interesting. But I think that what the announcers are talking about and what the athletes are thinking, it can't be the same. I mean, the athletes wouldn't get the great performances that they do if they're thinking about outcome. You have to be thinking about the small steps. You have to be thinking about the process. And then one of the things that I always talk about in coaching is that it's all about the start line. it does you no good to be thinking about what might happen at the finish line. Again, that's just energy that is just taking away from what you could use in your moment that you have an opportunity in which to be good.
Right.
So that's why I'm always talking about start lines over finish lines. That start lines are these magical moments and spaces of being present and being aware and being humble and being grounded and grateful. I mean, I remember pulling into the start gate. Look, we live in an apartment here in Laseo now. Our home stares straight up into the start gate of the 1992 Olympic race. And I look at it every day, and I don't remember. Honestly, I remember so much less about what happened after we crossed the finish line. But oh my gosh, from the time we woke up at 4:45 in the morning on the day of the Olympic Games until we crossed the start line, not the finish line, till we crossed the start line, I can tell you what we did every second of the day, what that routine looked like from 4:45 a.m. until we crossed the start line at 10:17 a.m.
That's interesting.
That's what we prepared for.
Well, I hope that that's the case with not just athletes, but people that really are trying to be the best at whatever they're doing, whether it's in business or anything. So that leads me into I'm going to skip over a chunk of your life here a little bit because I want to get to some really cool stuff here. So, really what you've done, which is fabulous, is you've not only I don't want to say leveraged your gold medal. That's the wrong way to say it. But I think what you're doing is you're saying, look, I learned so many lessons as a competitor, as an athlete, as an Olympian, as a international competitor. And so therefore you're in this mode now where you're doing performance coaching. Tell me a little bit about the type of people you like to work with and speak to and influence and improve and so forth.
Absolutely. So I would say that yes, as a performance coach, I have wonderful, successful experiences to share with people, but I have an equal number of non-successful experiences to share as well. I mean, look, I was the chief executive officer of the Olympic sport that I loved, the USA Canoe Kayak, and I struggled with that. I struggled to take care of myself when I was a CEO of an Olympic sport. I was ready to take care of everyone else, serve everyone else, but never take care of myself. My health paid a terrible price for that. I gained a lot of weight. Didn't sleep well. I was very irritable. I could have managed colleagues better. I could have done better work. And I did fix this while I was at USA Canoe Kayak, but it was a matter of fixing my health. So when we talk about performance coaching and the kind of people I like to work with, I love working with organizations and especially senior leadership teams. I am huge on culture. But when I talk about culture, I don't think that we talk ourselves into a good culture. I also don't think when I talk about culture, I'm not focused on what people are doing between the time they arrive at work and the time they leave work. I am really interested in what happens between the time they leave work and the time they come back the next day.
Interesting.
And yeah, I think there's a lot of things that happen there and how people take care of themselves that will ultimately make a difference on how culture improves. I am very big on simplification, subtraction, that less is more. And again, not just in words, but what does that look like in practice? And so that's what I do when I'm doing my very best work with in performance coaching and leadership training. Yes, I can do coaching online. I can do it in a conference room, but the best things happen when we actually get groups and teams and executives out onto the river. And I do that. That's the very best thing of all. Not as recess, but really figuring out what the issues are with an executive or with his or her team and how they're interacting with each other, and really set up purposefully designed exercises and activities that mimic what's happening in an experiential way. I just think the river is just the perfect guide for helping teams perform their best. I mean, I think that what we're doing in business, it mimics how we navigate whitewater river rapids. It's a force that doesn't stop. It's a force that's always going on. We have obstacles that we're trying to navigate. There's current that river current that we can either work with or we can fight against. This is a function of health. It's a function of culture. It's a function of simplicity. And so that's kind of what I bring forward into my work and what I'm a practitioner of in my life today.
Well, I think that's really awesome what you do by bringing people to the river, because you're right. I mean, I've seen so many athletes, retired athletes, Olympians, etc. And what they do is they'll go speak at a conference or at a company, their thing. And it's sometimes hard to imagine what they're saying and what they're talking about, because it's hard, they're in a conference room or they're on a stage and not. So I think what you make it much more genuine by bringing people to almost your turf, right? If it's that's really cool. That's great.
And in the world we're living in today, I mean, we have these man-made whitewater channels around the world. We have a wonderful one in Oklahoma City, of which I was a part of building during my time at USA Canoe Kayak. And those facilities, those venues are just wonderful for these kind of events. I use the Chattahoochee River in the middle of Atlanta, one of the other few American big cities where we can actually run those kind of programs. But it is what whitewater does is that so often we think about what we're doing in terms of roles. I'm the chief marketing officer. I'm the chief executive officer. I'm the janitor. I've never met a force of nature better than a river that just kind of wipes all those roles out of the way.
Levels the playing field, right?
Yeah, and we just have to get in the boat. We have to figure out ways to work together. We have to figure out ways to work with the water. We have to work together to confront obstacles that are in front of us. And here's the best part. Here's like my favorite curriculum of all the ones that I teach. I do a curriculum on course correction. That I always tell people that, we were talking about it earlier in the podcast, that I don't feel like on the day of the Olympics that we paddled better than the other teams. I feel like we corrected mistakes better than the other teams, and we anticipated mistakes better than the other teams. Remember our coach who said, I saw 5 mistakes on that first run. And by the end of that course correction curriculum, we show the Olympic video, and everyone in the room can pick out what the 5 mistakes are that we corrected. And the best part about that, Mark, is that at that point, we're not saying, oh, this is just Joe, some performance coach saying, pick out the mistakes, but we're showing people that on the day that you're the very best in the world, how you correct mistakes translates to being the very best in the world. It wasn't paddling better than everyone else. It wasn't doing anything better than anyone else except correcting mistakes and anticipating mistakes before they happen.
Well, that's such a great message too. I mean, and I'm thrilled to hear that that's how you coach people, because quite frankly, I see and hear also other coaches and motivational speakers and so forth. And I find that they tend to, quote, motivate, but what they do is they get people all riled up, but then they don't really know what the lesson is that they're learning, and they're not applying it in any sort of way. And that's the whole point of all this, is to sort of alter your habits and make them better, right?
We cannot talk ourselves through change. We can only act our way through change. And so what I found is that as much as a company wants to revamp their sales team or their marketing and branding and all those things, which are wonderful, I just find that when we make it about something more indirect, like your health, and what are some of the habits that you do first thing in the morning, that as you begin to get more disciplined and consistent with those really small things, then it becomes much easier to tackle the bigger things. You come at it with a different perspective, a different disposition, with different skill sets that you can work on, again, more consistently. And again, my own actions, I say that more than anything, I'm a practitioner of all of these things. In my case, the practice led me from being 30 pounds overweight and being not very good at my job to eventually getting much better at my job, figuring out that maybe there was something more to my life than my job. And eventually, over time, very slowly, nothing happened quickly for me. My family and I end up on this adventure, this quality of life move to another country where we're learning a different language, we're immersed in a different culture, and just taking on new experiences every day. That's it. That's all there is to it. And it's not about getting to the point of, I think what people see is my family and I getting on a plane and flying to another country to start a new life. But what I don't get asked about very often is, what did that second day look like when you were 30 pounds overweight and you decided to go back to the gym for a second day? No one ever asked about that. But I think figuring that out, what are the small little daily habits that you can do? That's all I know how to point back to, is what was it back then that kind of led to kind of getting some traction in the habits.
Right.
That's what I like to focus on. And so when you ask me, like, what builds culture, what facilitates change, what builds mindsets, it starts with something much more basic than that. Skills, the small steps forward every day is the way I talk about it.
Oh, that's great. So, we have a few minutes left, and I want to cover a couple of other things.
Okay.
One thing that's really important to me, and you know this already, I think, is that the concept of, when you're an athlete, you're spending so much of your blood, sweat, and tears and everything. You're really training for, the sport, and you don't have a lot of time to do other things. And as you get older in that sport, it's tough to really be prepared and for life after sport and the transition. And, I see that a lot of different sports entities and players associations and that sort of thing, they sort of try maybe to help out those players and those athletes make that transition, but it's not enough, I think. And I'm curious to know, based on your work that you did, running USA Canoe, and also your experience maybe with the USOC or the IOC, do you notice any specific programming that they have that either is good and or should be better, and or what do some of these Olympians really need?
Well, it is interesting that I think that one of the things that the USOC does well, right now they happen to have a really, really good, sharp person who's building a good team in there to help with the athlete transition skills. Having said that, I think too often we look to the traditional organizations for doing that, because you can also look at the U.S. Olympic Committee and know that it's having a lot of issues in a lot of other areas of their organization. It just so happens that athlete career development, I think, is probably one of their better ones. So I think that leads to the question, Mark, where else can the athletes get help and get resources? I should tell you that very kind of secondarily to what I do, that one of the most enjoyable experiences that I have kind of found me here in Liceo is a few of the Spanish athletes asked me to coach them. And I am coaching athletes again, but it's just something I enjoy doing. But I told them when we started coaching, I said, if you want to do this, here's what you need to know about me. There are enough high-performance athlete coaches in the sport. The last thing the sport needs is another athlete development coach. I'm a people development coach. All I care about is the development of the person. And I am trying to change that narrative with every young athlete that I meet today. And they cannot start young enough, because I think if you look at Instagram or you look at Facebook or you look at just any of the social media outlets, the athletes just believe that there's just this athlete path to high performance and doing better and being tougher and the resilient and more focused and work harder. And I don't disagree with those things, but I think they don't believe that there's room to develop as a person, how to be more empathetic, how to be more grateful, how to be more creative, how to take on things that serve your sport, not serve you, but make your sport better every day. I'll just, as an example, I tell every athlete that I work with that keeps a training log, if you will do one thing for me, and that is answer this question every night before you go to sleep: how did I serve my sport today? And I just want them to do one thing. Maybe it was they picked up a piece of trash at the venue, or maybe it was they wrote an email to one of the legends of the sport just to say thank you for your service. And it's not that I think that these are such riveting changes. I just want them to feel a little pain if they leave that question blank.
That's great.
So
that's cool.
It's a form of gratitude that we're trying to instill in our athletes as while they're developing as athletes. And I just think that these are these kind of soft skills that you talk about, and you know this better than anyone with the work that you do in the world that our young people are going into, and the way jobs are changing and the way we're collaborating on teams. It's about the soft skills, and you have to,
Absolutely.
It's never too early to start practicing those, and they will make you a better athlete as well.
Absolutely. That's perfect. So now we're jumping into a slightly different segment. It's called Hit Your Mark. And what I'm going to do is throw at you just a few quick questions. Just give me quick answers to these.
All right.
You've faced much harder than this. Trust me, these are going to be layups for you. But really, the first one I have is a quick separate story for you. You look at me, you probably think, I'm guessing you're probably thinking I'm an expert canoeist as well. And I can see why you'd think that. But my canoeing story is pretty simple. A couple of years ago, I was with a bunch of guys up in the Adirondacks, and we were going through some whitewater. And I was in the stern, and the guy in the front had never really done canoeing. And we managed to basically hit a rock pretty hard. And what it ended up doing was basically doing this to the canoe. It basically broke almost in half, and then it started pivoting around. So he kind of jumped out. He abandoned the Titanic pretty quickly. But I sat in the back, and as it filled with water, I'm like going, I don't think, I'm doing this, and I'm like, I don't think this is really working out. But I ended up staying with the ship, told it, and I dragged it ashore and so forth, but I completely demolished this thing. And I drove back with that sucker tied to the top of my Jeep, and of course, the guy, the owner, was kind of not as happy with his boat coming back looking like this. But that's my canoeing experience. I'm not traumatized by it, though. I'm happy to jump in another one because it was the guy in the front's fault. So I'm going to stick to that story. I'm throwing him under the bus or under the canoe, whatever it is. But with that said, what is one thing about canoeing that you think, or whitewater canoeing, that you think people have a complete misunderstanding of? Like, what is something that they just have wrong?
That you're in more control when you're in the current than you think. You're not at the mercy of the current. If you work with it and you slow down enough to feel the current, it works for you. You don't work for it.
Well, that's kind of cool. Because to me, I do feel like, I see it's funny. I see two separate things, because I'll see the current going down. I'm thinking, you guys are such experts at this stuff that you look at a ripple or a whatever it is or something, you know exactly what's happening underneath that action right there. Whereas, I see something, I'm like, I'm going to avoid all of that. I don't care what it really is. There may be a shark under there. It may be a rock. It may be a octopus, whatever. I know there aren't octopuses in rivers. I get it. But anyway, now, second question. I know this is pretty random, but in the sports community, a lot of times, it's a family, right? You're a family with your other competitors, and usually in families, there's some hijinks and some things going on that are pretty funny, like pranks and so forth. Do you recall any sort of a prank that was either done on you or you did on somebody else that still stands out as absolutely hilarious?
To It's a good question. I mean, I remember laughing a lot during my career. I do remember laughing. I mean, the people who do this sport are very engaging. They're a lot of fun to be around. I think because we don't compete directly against each other, like you would say in track or in football, where it's very one-to-one or head-to-head, there's just the athletes just get along very well. I don't think there's one like prank or that really stands out. All I can just tell you, Mark, I just feel like for the 19 years that I raced as a part of the U.S. whitewater team, I feel like I probably laughed probably more than any other emotion that I probably felt during those 19 years. Yeah, it was a wonderful group of people, and just the perspective of how we saw the world and meeting new kinds of people, and boy, the places that the sport takes you. And I think if you do it with a good sense of humor, you find a lot to laugh about, and just a lot of funny stories kind of come back all at once.
Oh, that's cool. All right, ready?
Yes.
Talent. You're a man of many talents, I'm sure. Give me one that is absolutely useless.
Seinfeld trivia. I've seen every episode. I mean, I don't watch much TV now, but once upon a time, and I still see Seinfeld clips on TV, but yeah, I don't think that's going to get me very far. Although there is one very funny Instagram account, Costanzagrams, that seems to be making it, I guess, is a comedian via his how life kind of mimics Seinfeld.
I might be able to go toe to toe with you on the Seinfeld. I mean, it's I feel that, especially living in New York, I pretty much live this life. I live every episode almost every day. So, but and you're right, absolutely useless. But it's almost, I hate saying this, as I feel like I'm an old grumpy guy when I say this, but they just don't make TV like they used to, right? I mean, that was a brilliant show. And
everything, I mean, still to this day, I mean, we clamor for Curb Your Enthusiasm because it's like the closest thing you can get.
It really is. All right, last question, super fast. Give me 3 people, alive or dead, that you would love to hang out with, have dinner with, a drink with, etc.
So many. Let's see. One, we'll say one from sports. I'll say Muhammad Ali.
Okay.
How about one from politics? I would say, I mean, this is just very current right now. I'd be interested in meeting the former president of Catalonia, Carles Puigdemont. And sorry, that's a really random one. And then let's see, you choose a field for me, and I'll tell you the people who I want to meet. I'll do it. How about we'll just since she just got was nominated, or the Kennedy Center awards, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Elaine from Seinfeld.
You want to dance with her?
Yes, yeah, I would make her look good. I would make her look good dancing.
I don't know about that, but that's great. It's funny. I have to tell you a quick funny story in just 2 seconds here, but I love asking that question, and I get some really interesting answers. But there was one guy that I went through a podcast with, and there was a technical issue, and I'd asked him that question, and he responded back with, I think he had said MLK Jr., he said Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. And then I had to tell him, look, we kind of goofed the recording of this. Can we record it again? And he was a great guy. He said, sure, no problem. But I was like, wait a minute, I can't let him go this easily. So the second time when we recorded, I said, well, give me 3 people. I said, but honestly, people usually say MLK, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett. Who are your 3?
That's funny.
It's like, oh, you rap, and then he had like Jimi Hendrix and whatever it was. But, it's funny, and every time I ask that question, I think of a few different people. So it's so my dinner table is going to be like 46 people now. I mean, it's probably going to be too big. But anyway, well, listen, just a quick wrap up, Joe. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a blast having you on the Make Your Mark podcast. You really have indicated pretty clearly how you make your mark, not just back then in the sport, but really how you continue that whole spirit, doing your experiences, your personal, performance coaching on a river. I think it's amazing. And that's such a great idea. And how you're leveraging your athleticism, but also what you've learned throughout that time into really improving other people's lives and making a positive impact. And that's I'm thrilled to have you on board today, Joe. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for the really kind words and the kind summary. I've really enjoyed this, and it's so nice to be having a nice conversation with one of my fellow authors from the Standing O.
Oh, that's right. Quick plug. Everybody buy this Standing O book.
Yes, buy this book.
It's got a collection of maybe 50 some odd essays in it, all really from a wide swath of people that are writing about who's been their biggest influence in their life. And the money goes to 2 charities. It's a worthy endeavor. Grab it on Amazon today, Standing O. How'd I do with that promo, Joe?
That was great. And boy, look, I mean, this is what we talked about, the soft skills. Scott wrote a book about one with gratitude. Yes. And it's a very inspiring story. It's one of the coolest projects that you and I have been a part of in the past year.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, listen, happy holidays. Thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it. And all the best. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Mark. See you later.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Your Mark podcast. The goal of the podcast is to help you find ways to make your mark, to succeed in life, and to jump past your competition. Be sure to leave me a review on iTunes and Stitcher, and subscribe to be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email, mark@markmoyer.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.